Try to remember your third birthday. Try harder. You probably can't. Not the cake, not the candles, not the faces around you. Somewhere in your past, an entire person existed who laughed, cried, learned to walk, and felt things deeply. That person was you, and you have almost no access to them at all. This isn't a flaw in your memory. It isn't because you weren't paying attention. It's something stranger, something built into the architecture of every human brain on Earth. Scientists have a name for it: infantile amnesia. And once you understand why it happens, you'll never think about your own mind the same way again. Here's the strange part. Babies aren't blank. From the moment they're born, they're absorbing the world at a staggering rate. They recognize their mother's voice within days. They learn the rhythms of language before they can speak a single word. Their brains are forming more new connections per second than at almost any other point in their lives. So why does almost none of it survive into adulthood? Sigmund Freud was the first to give this phenomenon a name back in the early 1900s. He called it infantile amnesia, and he had a theory. He believed the missing memories were repressed, buried by the mind to protect you from early sexual and emotional conflicts. It was a dramatic explanation. It was also, as later research would show, almost entirely wrong. The real answer isn't about repression, it's about construction. Your brain, in those earliest years, simply isn't built yet to store memories the way it will later. Think of it like a library being built. The shelves aren't finished. The cataloging system doesn't exist. Information comes in, but there's nowhere stable to put it down. The part of your brain responsible for this is called the hippocampus. It's a small, curved structure tucked deep in your temporal lobe, and it acts like the brain's filing clerk. It doesn't generate memories on its own. It takes scattered experiences and stitches them into something coherent, something you can later pull back out and call a memory. In infancy, this filing clerk is still in training. Psychologist Patricia Bauer at Emory University has spent decades studying exactly this. Her research tracked young children's memories over time, testing whether toddlers could later recall specific events from their own pasts. What she found was revealing. Toddlers could remember things, sometimes vividly, for weeks or months. But as they aged, those early memories didn't stay sharp. They faded, fragmented, and eventually disappeared almost entirely, replaced by nothing. So the memories were there, briefly, and then the system that was supposed to preserve them simply hadn't matured enough to keep them. There's another piece to this puzzle, and it has to do with something you don't think about very often: language. Before you could speak in full sentences, you experienced the world in pure sensation. Smells, textures, sounds without names attached to them. Memory, especially the kind you can describe to someone else, relies heavily on language as scaffolding. You remember in story form: beginning, middle, end. But a baby has no story form yet, only fragments of feeling with no framework to hold them together. Psychologist Carol Peterson at Memorial University of Newfoundland has spent years interviewing young children about their earliest memories, then returning years later to see what survived. Her studies found something fascinating. The memories that lasted longest weren't necessarily the most dramatic ones. They were the ones that had been talked about, retold, given language by a parent, a sibling, a story repeated at the dinner table. Memory, it turns out, is partly something you build together with the people around you. This is where it gets even stranger. The age at which infantile amnesia typically ends, somewhere around 3.5 to 4 years old, isn't a fixed line carved in stone. It shifts depending on culture. Researcher Chi Wang at Cornell University compared the earliest memories of children raised in different cultural environments and found that children from cultures that emphasize detailed personal storytelling tend to retain earlier, more specific memories than children from cultures that emphasize collective experience over individual narrative. Your earliest memories aren't just a product of your brain's wiring. They're shaped by the stories you were told and how often you were asked to tell your own. So if the hippocampus is still developing and language hasn't caught up yet, and your earliest memories depend partly on how often someone helped you turn them into stories, what does that mean for the memories you do have? The ones from age 4, 5, 6, that feel so certain, so Vivid? Here's the uncomfortable truth. They might not be accurate at all. Memory isn't a recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you recall something, your brain isn't pulling up a stored video file. It's rebuilding the moment from fragments, filling in gaps with assumption, emotion, and whatever you've heard about that moment since. Cognitive psychologist Nora Newcomb, who has studied early memory development extensively, has pointed out that children's earliest memories are sometimes constructed almost entirely from family photographs and retold stories rather than direct experience. You may be holding on to a memory of your second birthday that is, in truth, a memory of a photograph someone showed you years later. This raises a question most people never stop to ask. If your earliest sense of self is partly invented, partly inherited from other people's retelling, then where exactly does you begin? It's tempting to think of identity as something continuous, a single thread running from infant to adult, intact and unbroken. But the science suggests something closer to a relay race. The baby version of you handed off almost nothing directly. What you inherited instead was shaped by your parents' retellings, your culture's storytelling habits, and a brain that was still under construction. The self you think you've always been is, in large part, something assembled after the fact. And yet, here's the part that should feel less unsettling and more remarkable. Even though you can't remember those years, they didn't disappear. The wiring laid down in infancy, the attachment patterns formed with the people who held you, the emotional responses shaped before you could speak, all of it remains active in how you move through the world today. You don't remember learning to trust or distrust certain kinds of comfort. You don't remember the thousands of small interactions that taught your nervous system how to respond to stress. But you carry the residue of every one of them. This is sometimes called implicit memory, and it's entirely different from the kind of memory you can talk about over dinner. Implicit memory lives in your reflexes, your instincts, your gut feelings. It's why certain smells can flood you with comfort you can't explain. It's why certain tones of voice can make you tense before you even register why. The hippocampus may not have been ready to file away your second birthday party as a story, but other parts of your brain were quietly learning, recording, shaping you in ways that have nothing to do with conscious recall. So when you think about your missing years, the ones with no pictures in your mind at all, consider what's actually true. They weren't lost. They were absorbed differently. They became the foundation under the house instead of a room you can walk back into. You can't visit it, but you're still standing on it every single day. There's something almost humbling in that. The most formative years of your life, the years that shaped your earliest attachments, your sense of safety, your baseline understanding of whether the world is a place that responds to you with warmth or indifference, are years you will never be able to consciously revisit. And yet, they are arguably more responsible for who you are today than almost anything that's happened since. Maybe that's why people are so drawn to baby photos, to old home videos, to asking their parents, what was I like back then? It isn't idle curiosity. It's an attempt to recover access to a version of yourself that built the foundation you're still living on, using borrowed memories because your own simply weren't built to last. So try again. Try to remember your third birthday. You still won't get there. But now you know why. It isn't because that moment didn't matter. It's because it mattered so much that your brain spent everything it had just learning how to exist, with no room left over to write it down. The person you were back then didn't vanish. They became the floor you're standing on, the one part of you too foundational to ever look at directly.